It's that time of the year again. It's time to go over my top films of 2018. So let's begin with the runner-ups. We got Tomb Raider, Red Sparrow, Game Night, Black Panther, Unstoppable, Leave No Trace, Buy Bust, Black Klansman, Suspiria the Remake, Bad Times at the El Royale, A Simple Favor, A Private War, Crazy Rich Asians, Hereditary, Blockers, Isle of Dogs, Searching, and Bumblebee. So those are my runner-ups, the films that didn't quite make it that are still pretty good themselves. But let's begin with number 10, Batman Gotham by Gaslight. This is a direct-to-video movie about Batman if he were to take place in steampunk version of the Victorian England, go up against Jack the Ripper. This movie is a little bit different because it's one of those what-if universes. It's Elseworlds Tale. Elseworlds Tale means basically you can do whatever you want because you're taking a character and just completely changing everything about it. For example, Red Sun was a story in which Superman was found by the Russians during the Cold War. So Superman became a sort of dictator and took over Russia. So Batman Gotham by Gaslight is a little bit different because Batman doesn't have as much technology because it takes place in Victoria, England. So he does have some gadgets here or there, but he's mostly a boxer. And that heightens the tension a little bit because he's going up against a serial killer like Jack the Ripper. The movie also has a lot of surprises, a very dark subject matter. I've had the opportunity to read the graphic novel that it's based on. The movie does a way better job with the twists and everything. The graphic novel, has some pacing issues. It's not as exciting. The movie is wonderful. Gotham by Gaslight is number 10. Number 9 is Burning. This is a Lee Chang-dong film. I was watching a whole bunch of his films before in anticipation of this film. This movie is one of those quiet movies that takes you by surprise. I saw it at the Vancouver International Film Festival. It stars that actor whose name I cannot remember. He's like a pretty boy who was in the movie Veteran. But in this movie, he plays a sort of poor farmer's kid who has to take care of the farm because his dad keeps getting into trouble. It's one of those movies that it goes really quietly and it sort of sinks its fangs into you with the disquiet and the amount of sheer tension just sort of searing under the surface. It's the kind of movie that Hitchcock would have made back in his day. A lot of people might not like the pacing issues of the first 2/3 of the film, but the movie needs that sort of build-up before it gets sinister. And the acting from the three central characters is what pretty much holds the film together. You've got the main character who is worried about his missing female friend, but then you've got Glenn from The Walking Dead just doing a wonderful creepy job as Ben, this rich sort of mysterious guy that just starts dating her. And the movie just takes you to so many dark places. The amount of dread in this film rivals horror films, even though it's not a horror film. It's more of a drama thriller. But Burning is one of those movies that just seeps into your skin and never lets you go. Burning is number 9. Number 8 is Aquaman, a movie that I wasn't sure would be good. However, it is a movie that defied all of my expectations and even further. I am a casual Aquaman fan. I've seen him in Super Friends, Justice League. I've read his New 52 version of comics, but this version of Aquaman is one that sort of does for what Wonder Woman or Iron Man or Captain America or Thor did for their movies to make Aquaman a household name. This is a movie that isn't entirely his film. It takes place after Justice League, but it's a movie that's bombastic. It's visually wonderful. It's got so many cool mythos that I don't know if they created, I think they created some of these mythos for the film. I don't think a lot of these elements are actually in the comics, like the giant creature, the Coranth, and like all the other tribes. I don't recall them being, but I haven't read all the comics, so I can't be 100% sure. But this movie is something to be astounded. It feels like an old school action adventure film, something that is really missing these days. A lot of movies delve into too many different genres, but this movie feels like a full-on fun action adventure story with creatures, with monsters, with romance. All of the crowd-pleasing elements are there, especially some of the direction. From the sweeping camera work during the fight scenes to that dive where they dive into the kingdom of the trench, and it's just like a quiet piano just lingering, and then the camera just keeps going backwards as you see more and more trench creatures following them. The movie is just absolutely wonderful. It's a little bit cheesy, but in a good way. Aquaman is number 8. Number 7 is Destroyer, a movie that probably dived under a lot of people's radar. It was a movie that was a little bit of a movie that probably is going to be very underrated in the future. It feels like a Catherine Bigelow film. It is a movie about a weary and dogged detective who sees someone from her past, and it makes her have to go up against the demons that have been haunting her for the last 10 to 15 years. The transformative performance by Nicole Kidman is probably the real star here, as well as the film's cinematography. The movie's, in my opinion, the cinematography of Destroyer is superior to Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, which is something that's probably going to disagree with a lot of people, but I felt Destroyer had way superior cinematography. The action sequences are very sparse, but there's about 2 of them that are just really tension-filled. Karen Kusama definitely owes a lot to Catherine Bigelow's sort of intense, gritty nature. It feels like a movie that she would have done herself. However, this film, it's fueled back on the backstory, so the flashbacks are just as interesting as what's happening in the present day. At times it feels like a really interesting noir film, but the performances and the changes from the characters from the before flashbacks and the after is what fuels the drama going into present day. So Destroyer is number 7. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is number 6. This movie absolutely blew me away. This was the biggest risk that Sony could have taken for this year. I think the budget was pretty high. It was like 100 million or so. It's a movie about a different Spider-Man becoming Spider-Man through a different way. And it's a movie that pretty much was a huge gamble, but it paid off in all the right ways. It's a movie that not only was a financial hit, but it also won the Oscar for Best Animated Film. So it's a movie that breaks the barrier for having a main character who's unsure of himself, but also being a Latino mix. There's also the fact that there's a literal cartoon pig in the movie, parody of Batman, Spider-Gwen, an aged Peter Parker who isn't 100% confident. The movie shouldn't have worked, but it did do it. It's an amazing script, and the unique visual style definitely helps too, but the movie's sort of unpredictable tone, it feels like a breath of fresh air every 10 minutes, despite what you think you've seen before. It's going to be the game changer for how Sony does animation and how it does the sequels and spin-offs or anything that it wants to do in the future. But it's a movie that was able to defeat Pixar and Disney at their own game when they usually take the Oscar every year. So Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is number 6. Number 5 is 8th Grade, the film that sort of became the little indie darling, but it got overlooked at the awards season. Elsie Fisher plays the character who is really endearing. She feels really real. This movie is an indie gem of sorts. It is able to win you over with simple charm and simple storytelling. It is a coming-of-age film that is relevant. It is current. It makes you cringe. It makes you uncomfortable. It shows the supreme awkwardness of being an adolescent in today's society and being overlooked or being unsure of yourself. It is a movie that pretty much hinges on the main character's performance, and she's able to nail it completely. So 8th Grade is number 5. The Sisters Brothers is number 4. This is another overlooked film directed by Jacques Audiard. He did the movie Rust and Bone, and I think he did something else, I don't remember. Oh yeah, Deepan. Anyways, this movie is about a pair of skilled assassin brothers who are trying to complete a mission for their boss. However, they find their allegiances sort of wandering when we find out that the person that they're tracking has teamed up with the person they are stalking. This movie is a bit of a sort of, what's the word? It's a sort of play on the classic Western genre. When you think of Western genre, you think of weary men walking around with guns, honor and betrayal and good and evil. This movie is a bit of a movie that has nothing to do with any of that. It's about ambition. It's about how you see yourself. It's about reputation. The movie is also shockingly violent as well. However, the movie does have a heart with its main characters. The bond between the main character, pretty much what carries the emotional part of the film. Without that bond of them being brothers, the movie doesn't have anything to go with it. The movie's also really interesting in the way that it's violent, but it doesn't focus too much on the action. It's more of a character study. And this movie surprised me a lot because every time the movie could have faltered and been shitty, it didn't go in that direction. The movie is very surprising. It's very low-key. The film manages to surprise you in all the correct ways with amazing performances, a different sort of plot, and a different kind of ending. So The Sisters Brothers is number 4. Ben is Back is number 3. This is yet another underrated movie that sort of got swept under the table. No Oscar nominations or anything, despite it being starring heavyweights like Julia Roberts and Lucas Hedges. This movie is one of those movies that manages to capture a subject in its perfect entirety. The main character is Ben, the firstborn son who appears outside of the house near Christmas time. His mother is happy to see him, however his sister and his father-in-law, I guess, is not happy to see him because Ben is known for manipulative behavior. He is a drug addict, addicted to opioids or whatever he can get his hands on. They're not sure if he should be at home, and they have to figure out what they're going to do for this holiday season. So this movie is a Christmas film, but it has barely anything to do with Christmas at all. This movie is about the bond between family and the toxic nature of drug addiction. This movie does not turn its head away from the ugly monster that is drug addiction. It is able to document a sort of realistic version of what it would be like to have a son for a drug addict. And the movie doesn't shy away from the darker elements of that lifestyle. And of course the movie is also anchored by so many fantastic performances. Julia Roberts plays a mother who is loving, however she's a little bit of an enabler. She goes a little bit too soft on her son because, you know, she loves him, but, you know, it's the other characters have to try to keep her in check. And the movie's so uncomfortable, but it's also thrilling, it's dramatic, it's everything you could want in a film about drug addiction. It's a movie that doesn't shy away from the darker topics. Unlike another movie, Beautiful Boy, that kind of just played with the punches a little bit, Ben is Back is a movie that's raw, emotional, unrelenting. So Ben is Back is number 3. Upgrade is number 2. I seem to be selecting all these films that didn't make a splash at the box office, but they made a bigger impression on me simply for the storytelling style. Upgrade is a science fiction action film directed and written by Lee Whannell. If you're unfamiliar with him, he co-wrote Saw, I believe, and a few other movies with James Wan. And he's decided to go off on his own with this techno sci-fi thriller. This movie has a sort of gritty, sort of grindhouse feel, even though it is a science fiction film. It is about a hands-on mechanic who gets attacked by a violent group of criminals when his futuristic car is hijacked and his wife is murdered before his eyes and he's crippled. So his billionaire friend, who also happens to be a tech genius, offers him a chance at walking again with STEM. It is a microchip basically implanted into his neck, and it'll use electricity to use the nerve endings to give him back his body. So he decides he's got nothing to lose, and he ends up getting this amazing power of being able to walk again. However, he's not allowed to tell anyone, and the movie goes in a different direction. It becomes a sort of RoboCop-like thriller in which our main character uses the AI in his brain to get revenge on the men who attacked him and his wife. The movie also has so many themes of how dark technology can be, ambition. It's not a movie that doesn't shy away from taking its time to develop how depressed the main character gets after losing everything, and seeing the fury of him going after revenge. The revenge part of the movie is not what drives the film. It is the lack of humanity. It is also the rich themes just drip all over this movie. It's more than just a guy running around attacking people. The movie is also thrilling, suspenseful. It has this cop character who's always trying to investigate him, and the movie has some pretty interesting, shocking twists that lead to a more complex narrative than just a revenge film. Upgrade is a very special film for me because it's not only thrilling, but it's also well acted, it's also well directed. And it also has the rich sci-fi themes that have been missing in a lot of science fiction movies as of late. So Upgrade is number 2. Number 1 is Makiya, When the Promised Flower Blooms. This is another film that I only got a chance to see one time in theaters because it was playing at an independent theater. It is an animated film, an anime film directed by Mari Okada. She has her fingers in other projects, but mostly as a screenwriter. This is her directorial debut, and it is a movie that just absolutely tears you apart emotionally. It can be described as Highlander meets Lord of the Rings, but more emotional. That's the thing that sort of hits you in the stomach. It's one of those movies that just slowly sucks you in and then hits you with that emotional dagger at the end. The movie is about the Lorf. They are a race of near immortal elf-like beings that can live longer than anyone else. And they live isolated, away from everyone else until they are attacked by a neighboring kingdom who wishes to kidnap some as a sample so they can make hybrid children that will last longer and give them an edge over other competing kingdoms. So our main character, she finds herself escaping from the assault and finding a human baby abandoned. She decides to take care of it despite, being lost on her own. And what would happen is this movie goes on a sweeping multi-decade sort of tale of motherhood. The movie is able to just weave the perfect story. The economy is also there. There's also a few side characters that sort of pop in and out, but the main bond is between a mother and her child. And it focuses on all the different aspects of childhood. There's him as a toddler, there's him as a teenager that gets uncomfortable when he realizes that she never ages. And there's the point where he gets to adulthood and he wants to leave her. And it's just very heartbreaking, especially when war breaks out and he signs up to be a soldier. Makiya has amazing, beautiful animation, but it's the storytelling in itself. It's something that's very ambitious. It's very encompassing. It's very human, even though it's a fantasy story. It's a movie that could have easily sort of lost itself in the action element. However, the action element sort of sits in the background because this movie is about the characters and their relationships with each other and the way it evolves throughout the years. And Makiya, When the Promised Flower Blooms is just one of those films that just absolutely blew me away. It's a movie that is a lot better than it had any right to be. It's a movie that just sets the bar for the next genre. It makes the last 5 Ghibli movies look like child's play. So Makiya, When the Promised Flower Blooms is number 1 and my favorite film of 2018.